Welcome to another episode of Discussions with Dezzi. Today, I have a special guest, Christina Parle. And just to give you a little bit of insight, she is a diversity, equity, and inclusion speaker and consultant. And how I met her was actually through my sorority, Sigma Kappa. I met her where she came and gave us a workshop. I think the most memorable moment of that workshop was when she pointed out the difference between diversity and inclusion. When it comes to inclusion, we'll go to definition of all the terms later, but just differentiating between those opened my eyes in how these little things can impact us in our lives and just knowing these definitions. So go ahead and can you give us a little bit more elaborate introduction of what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, excited to be here with you. Of course, as Destiny said, my name is Christina Parle. I live in Kansas City, Missouri. I use she, they pronouns. I am a member of Sigma Kappa, and that is how we got connected. I professionally, as Destiny said, do equity, inclusion, and diversity content in a lot of different realms, but I really try to do it from a foundational and holistic perspective. So not just focusing on any one identity or any one experience, but really trying to set the stage and help people understand it holistically, as well as trying to focus on the foundational pieces that I think a lot of people miss, right? So a lot of people don't do self-work around their identities. They don't understand power and privilege and things like bias. And so those are the pieces that I'm really trying to bring to the forefront. And so I do that through my company, Social Responsibility Speaks, which is really just gotten kicked off. And then in my full-time day job, I work for Zeta Beta Tau fraternity headquarters, and I do lots of different things for them, but it is a historically Jewish men's organization. So that is what I do in my day job.
So yes, in the link below, y'all, you're gonna go ahead and see where you can follow her. We always support each other here, so that'll be in the link below. Okay, so like I said, I wanted to go ahead and go off of definitions. So a definition, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, of diversity is a condition of having or being composed of different elements. And the definition of inclusion is to take in or comprise as a part of a whole or group. What are your definitions of diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely not that. So when I think about diversity, I really think about it from the perspective of course, difference in general, but difference really in regards to our social identities, our perspectives, our experiences, our backgrounds. And then I always teach diversity as having this caveat around how those identities, perspectives, and backgrounds impact the way we see and receive the world, and the way the world sees and receives us based on those things as well, right? And so I love that for some people, diversity is like, we have different majors, or we have different personalities, or we have different hair color, or whatever it is. But it is also this component of really your lived experience, right? And how that impacts the way you view the world. So that's really how I teach the concept of diversity. And then in regards to inclusion, I really try to focus on people being heard, seen, valued, validated, and feeling like they can show up in the space and be who they are, right? And not having to shed pieces of themselves because the environment is not inclusive. And so I believe we all truly have a social responsibility, right, to create inclusive spaces wherever we go for all different types of people. And then you didn't ask me, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about equity too, because I do think a lot of times equity gets lost in the conversation. And I don't believe that you can have diversity and like maintain and retain diverse groups or people without eliminating barriers. And that's what equity is all about, is eliminating barriers for people to have access and fair treatment and have advancement as the most privileged of us in this country. And so those are, the three areas that I really think of and how I communicate them to folks.
So on the topic actually of equity, I hear this a lot because I even thought equality and equity were the same at one point. Can you go ahead and point out what the difference is?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is such a great conversation, I think. And I think the two aren't easily confused, right? I mean, they are spelled very similar. People use them interchangeably, but I always talk about equity and equality. So if you and I both have to go to the doctor, right? But you have the common cold and I have pneumonia. Equality is really the doctor giving us the same medication and saying, like, hope you get better, right? Equity is saying, oh, what Christina is experiencing is actually a lot more significant. So I'm going to give her what she needs in order to be successful or to get healthier, right? In that type of scenario. And so thinking about equality is giving everybody the same thing in order to exist, thrive, survive. Equity is really saying, wow, Destiny has had a lot of barriers in their life, right? Like there's been a lot of things that have impacted their ability to show up every single day and be great. And so how can we eliminate those barriers to be able to support them? So like a great example of that might be when you think about the concept of disability. And maybe you work in a building that isn't ADA compliant, right? They don't have a ramp. The buttons for the elevator aren't accessible, whatever it may be. But thinking about how creating those opportunities is eliminating barriers for folks with physical disabilities, maybe, to be able to navigate the world in a similar fashion to those who are able-bodied, right? And so equity is all about that concept of eliminating barriers.
Because there's actually I'm going to put in here, it's going to pop up here. But what I think of, I think there's a visual that represents this perfectly where everyone is standing here in front of a fence. And the people here, if you say equality, everyone has the same size. Let's say everyone's standing on a trash can. So they are standing on the same size trash can. But when you have equity, if I'm shorter and I can't see over because of equality, you raise it up so I can see, then it becomes equity. But that's just a visual that always comes to mind when I think of that.
Yeah, and when you share the visual, you should also share the newest one that talks about liberation and talks about just taking down the wall altogether. So you don't have to give people boxes or any of those things, right? You can just create a space where there are barriers for them. And so that is definitely, that newest graphic I think has been really helpful in helping people understand, like, why did this barrier exist in the first place, right? Like, let's just liberate everyone.
That's true. So what does diversity, inclusion, equity what does that look like in everyday life nowadays? Because you're walking down the street, you see, because we have all these implicit biases, how do we deal with them? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, so I live in what I call the edge of the hood. And so I am frequently in the inner city. And so I'll give you just, I'm an examples person. So I'll give you an example. I regularly see folks on the side of the road, right, who are asking for money. And I think that's one of those things that we can be really intentional about not prejudging that person, not assuming their life story, not assuming that they are wanting something that they haven't actually told you that they want, right? Also, not assuming that they're going to use the money that you maybe give them in one way or the other. So I think that is literally diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Acknowledging and interrupting those biases that we have, that whether we believe them consciously, right, we unconsciously are having these thoughts. And so I really think that diversity, equity, and inclusion in your everyday life is being aware of your own privilege and how it's showing up. And that goes for everyone because everybody has privilege in some way. And then 2 is interrupting implicit bias when you notice it, and making a conscious effort to unlearn that implicit bias. And then 3 would be to disrupt and interrupt other people's behavior as it becomes problematic for you or for others, right? So that doesn't mean screaming at people, yelling at people. That doesn't mean canceling them, right? It doesn't mean those things, but it does mean engaging in hopefully productive conversation with people to help kind of deconstruct the thoughts that they have.
Have those conversations, people. I cannot express that enough. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. I think I heard you say that at one point. I was just like, that stuck with me. That's exactly what we need to do. And that's really how we progress.
Yeah.
So like piggybacking off the last question, what does this look like in the workplace? Diversity, inclusion, equity.
Yeah. So it's such a good question. I think it depends on your positionality in the workplace. I will give you a great example. I have worked in jobs where things have been said, where things have been done that were wildly harmful or problematic. And I didn't say anything because of fear, right? A repercussion of losing my job or getting in trouble or, whatever it may be, right? And so I think you first have to ask yourself, like, what's your capacity? What are you able to do and actually push the needle a little bit, right, for people? But I absolutely think, again, if somebody says something problematic, what do you mean? Tell me more about what you're talking about. Help me understand what you mean. Or, giving them information that might help them kind of understand what they're saying is inaccurate or incorrect or problematic. So I think that is some of it, while also pushing the conversation around equity, inclusion, and diversity, right? So not letting everything be so reactionary to situations that maybe have happened, but rather trying to get your leadership and the folks that you work with to get ahead of it and start caring about the conversation, because the world is demanding that we do that. Our administration is trying to keep us from having these conversations, but I think that it's important that we meet the demand of respecting and valuing people's humanity in whatever way they show up. And so I think that's why this is so important.
So I think just like your comments are reminding me of course, you can do that in the workplace or even organizational, for example, Sigma Kappa bringing DEIA, diversity, inclusion, equity, and accessibility. So how should we construct these, these programs or implement these from a workplace perspective? Because if your workplace, if we're at school, you can go to Title IX, but if you're at your workplace and they don't have anything established, how can you find information? What resources can you reach out to kind of build that?
Yeah, I think you can always, of course, ask a speaker or a consultant, somebody to come in and do really specific work based on your workplace, right? The kind of work that I do, the kind of work that so many people do. So I think that is one big one that I think a lot of people will rely on, unless you, of course, already have a structure like you mentioned within your workplace. Two, there are tons of resources, right? You could literally pull a 3-page article that everybody reads and you debrief. You could do a full book, together that you read and debrief once a week or whatever. You could do the social identity wheel together to just get a better understanding of what your identities are. If you're wanting to learn more about the LGBTQIA plus community, you could do the genderbread person or unicorn person that talks you through like gender and sex and sexual orientation and attraction and all of those things. You could do, what is it called? Lenses of Oppression, maybe is what it's called, but it's a document that kind of talks about how oppression is at an individual level, it's at an interactive level, it's at a structural level, an institutional level, right? It talks about how some of those things, we didn't get here by just like person-to-person interactions, right? Now all of this stuff has been embedded into everything that we do, and that's why it's so problematic. And so there's a lot, literally, especially right now, you could probably say, what are some diversity, equity, and inclusion activities we could do? And there are many. So, yeah.
So just going off that concept as well, finding those materials, embracing that. I'm just going to throw out a common phrase too, having a seat at the table. Once you get to sit at the table, you open up doors for others, regardless like gender, sexual, whatever your idea is, to open up that door. So how do you believe that this can apply in opening up that, like getting a seat at the table? How important is that for the next generation, for the next group?